Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so what we were learning yesterday is if you see your friend drowning, you have a mitzvah to try and save him because there's a prohibition in the Torah of lo ta'amod al damrei echad. Do not stand idly by over your brother's blood. And we saw in the Imrei Yaakov yesterday. We had just started the Imrei Yaakov. I believe we had just seen Sifkat Nun over here. So we're finishing the packet of, Imrei Yaakov 10 PDF. We're going to cross over to 11. So one thing that we saw is that there's a basis in halacha for this concept of hatzalah, right? That every community should have people in the community who are there to be ready to save someone. And this is quoted from Rabbeinu Yonah. So this is the basis. It goes all the way back to Rabbeinu Yonah of Gerundi, which is 14th century. And it basically is the idea that Jewish communities should always have people in them who are on the ready to help, which is a great idea, which is a great thing. It's not a 20th century innovation. This is something that has been part of our tradition. Now, Tovea biyam, if you see someone drowning in the ocean, the kol shekain lahatzil nafsho mine shachat shelo yishtameid. Now, this is also true that if you there's a mitzvah to try and physically save someone, you also have a mitzvah to spiritually save someone if you see that they are in danger of being shmadded, right? Which means that they're right. So there's a Jew who's about to convert to Christianity, and you know that you have the ability to try and save them by talking to them, by bringing them under your wing, then you certainly have that obligation. This, of course, is the basis for not only Jews for Judaism, to try and save people from Christian missionaries, but also to save people from just completely falling off the cliff of Judaism, which is really the bigger issue today. Not Jews for Jesus, but really Jews who sort of just opt out completely. Jews for nothing, you could call them. Okay. Ish v'isha shetovim bayamo banahar. Now here we get into something a little bit controversial. Let's say there's a man and a woman drowning. Who do you save first? Well, chivalry, right? I saw a comedy shtick from this guy, Bill Burr. He says, how come, women complain, how come men earn more than women, on average? So he said, I'll tell you why. It's a service fee for when we're on the Titanic and they say women and children first, and we get stuck behind. He says that's the exchange. But he was saying that as a joke. It went over very well. But anyway, so what do you do? Ish v'isha shetovim bayamo banahar. A man and a woman are drowning at the same time. So hatzalas ha'ish kodem mipnei shehu chayav tvei b'mitzvos. There's a mitzvah to save the man first because he has more mitzvahs to do. All right. Sometimes I wish the tape wasn't rolling, right? So that's one of those. So this is brought down in Yoredeya, and he says, I refer you to the Chafetz Chaim's Avas Chesed in the Nesiv HaChesed, and because I don't have my Sfarim here with me, we won't be able to look at that today, but B'li Neder, I'll try and bring that with me next time. We'll take a look. The Chafetz Chaim apparently has a discussion about this. Okay. So you either have a mitzvah to save the drowning person yourself or to hire someone to save them. And even though it's beneath your dignity to jump in the water, there is no issue of dignity or kavod involved. You're still obligated to save. Because the mitzvah of saving a life is never overridden by a person saying, well, I can't be seen like this, V'da od, The im yachol lahatzil ve'eno matzil over chutz mehalav de lo samod gam al ase de v'hashevo solo zu avedas gufo. Just to let you know that there's an additional mitzvah that you violate if you don't save the person when you have the opportunity to do so. Number one, you are over on lo samad al dam re'echa. Do not stand over your brother's blood, your friend's blood, and you're also in violation of the positive commandment of a hashevosa, the return to your friend his lost objects. And the Gemara learns from there that if you have an obligation to return lost property, you certainly have an obligation to return a lost soul. A person's life is being lost. So I remember at my Rosh Yeshiva's Levaya, his son got up, Rabbi Weinberg, his son got up and said that he had grown up in Eretz Yisrael as a little child before his family moved to the U.S. And he had gone to a cheder, and the cheder was in a building, and next door there was a fire. Fire broke out, and they heard a woman's cries. And the Rebbe said, "We're learning. Let someone else take care of it." And he couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old at the time, but he got up and he left the class, and he never came back to that cheder. Because that was one of the testimonials about him, is that he knew intuitively what was right and wrong. And there's no such thing as we're involved in a more important mitzvah or anything like that. When it comes to saving lives, you have to save lives.
Jewish 7, what's the halacha of that? I learned before that if the people is not Jewish, you shouldn't jump into the water.
So there's been no distinction made yet between Jew and non-Jew here. That's the question. Does this apply that you violate any mitzvah to save a non-Jew? It's a very interesting question. Rav Moshe paskins that if you're a doctor, you don't make any differentiation whatsoever between a Jewish patient and a non-Jewish patient. And I don't know. Look, the Torah says, "Lo samad al dam re'echa." You're not allowed to stand over the blood of your re'ah, which is your fellow, usually translated as your fellow Jew. Whether or not this applies to, technically, whether it applies to a non-Jew or not, we haven't seen that distinction yet. It could be that the only difference would be that you're not obligated to enter into put your life at risk in order to save a non-Jew. But obviously, every person's life is holy and infinitely precious. Everyone's created b'tselem Elokim. So whenever you have an opportunity to save someone's life, you have an obligation, whether they're Jewish or non-Jewish. I think the only issue is, what are you technically in violation of if you don't? But we'll have to see. Maybe he'll delineate this. But I can't imagine that the halacha would let you walk by someone who's drowning because they're a non-Jew. It doesn't make sense. Well, I don't think even back in the day either. I don't think so. I mean, there is a concept in halacha that if a person is an idolater or a heathen, then as a form of abolishing idolatry, there's no obligation. But today, people do not have the status of idolaters. Non-Jews have the status we impute to them the assumption that they observe at least the majority of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, 7 Noachide laws, and so therefore they have the din of a ger toshav, and so it would stand to reason that you're obligated to save them. Okay. So that's the halacha, that you have an obligation to save them, and you can't excuse yourself because it's beneath your dignity. Next, v'chozer v'nifra mimenu, and if you need to hire or you need to expend money in order to save their lives. You are allowed to collect from the victim afterwards, the person that you've saved. You can send them a bill and expect them to pay for it. He says, because a person is not obligated to spend money to save his friend if his friend has the means to cover it. Let's say the guy had no money, he was completely destitute when you saved him, and then afterwards he gets money. That money is you're not entitled to. In other words, you're only entitled to the money that he had at the time when he was saved. The imlav, and if not, if he doesn't have money, you still may not desist from the mitzvah. So the Imrei Yaakov says, and we're here on page now Kuf Tzadi, but you're not obligated to spend an exorbitant amount so that you're going to be left destitute in the course of saving his life. The after kaimalan, the avor mitzvahs lo sasei chayv litain kol mamono kidi isa ba'arachayim simin tavration and bav. He says, because even though we do have a halacha in Shulchan Aruch that in order to avoid violating a negative commandment, you have to spend the sky's the limit in order to avoid violating a negative commandment, like that you're not allowed to eat pork, right? So no matter how much it costs, if the only, or non-kosher food, no matter how much it costs, you can't allow yourself to eat non-kosher food. You have to spend as much money as it costs in order to get kosher food, right? Or whatever other example. So the question you might ask is, the Torah has a negative commandment here, lo samadol dam re'echa, I cannot stand idly by. So how much do I have to spend of my own assets in order to do that? Is there an unlimited amount, even if it's millions upon millions of dollars? So he says, no. Hasam hakavana below sase sheyesh ba'maisa. There, when the Shulchan Aruch says you have to spend whatever it costs, that's to avoid doing an active act of a mitzvah lo sase. Masha'in kein b'inyanenu after over alo samad al dam re'echa. But in our situation, even though there is a violation of a negative commandment, mikol makom ein bo ma'isa, but it's active, it's passive, it's not active. Or the Torah says, do not be idle over your brother's blood, right? So by being idle, I'm not doing an act. So there, the Shulchan Aruch does not require me to spend whatever money I have in order to avoid being passive. Some poskim actually disagree with this. And they say that no matter how much it costs, you have to spend, even for a passive violation, you have to spend whatever money you have in order to avoid violating lo samadol dam re'echa. Right? V'chola mesukan hazakuk l'nituach hakorach b'hotzos merubos ayin belikutim sifkatan yudbei. So what happens if you know a friend who needs surgery, a life-saving surgery? And what about the mitzvah of lo samadol dam re'echa? Do you have to then pay for a guy who comes from Eretz Yisrael, has come here, and needs to raise $100,000? Am I obligated because of lo samadol dam re'echa that I have to pay for his surgery? So that's the question. In other words, upon whom is it incumbent of this mitzvah of lo samadol dam re'echa? Is it incumbent upon each and every one of us to personally take responsibility for every single person who needs their life saved? That's really what we're going to see when we get a little bit further into this halacha. Okay. We'll see that. We'll do something in the Likutim shortly, which will help us clarify this issue. Next, Bisafik Sakana, that the question is, am I allowed to, or am I supposed to put my own life at risk to save someone else's life? So some people say yes, and some people say no. So, aval bevadai sakana lekuli alma eno mechuyev dechayev kodmim lechaye chavera. To put yourself at certain risk. No, in other words, if the danger to your life is real, in other words, there's two terms, suffix sakana and vadai sakana. Suffix sakana means there is a risk that your life may be endangered. But vadai sakana means there is certain risk. It's a higher level or a certain danger to your life, like running into a burning building, where you know for sure that you are entering into an area where your life is there's a high risk that your life will be lost. That you're not obligated to do, to run into a burning building. Okay, so yesh omrim shetzarich kein hudas haYerushalmi ulam harifa harambam v'chein hashulchan aruch ushpitu din zeh v'chenira shesvir lehu dahabavli poligal haYerushalmi. This is very interesting. He says that this is a machlokes, the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. The Talmud Yerushalmi says to enter into a situation where there may be risk involved is your obligation. But the Talmud Bavli does not say that, and the Rambam and the Rif seem to say that we side more with the Talmud Bavli than the Talmud Yerushalmi in this area. By the way, there are times when the Rambam paskins like the Yerushalmi, but in this situation he paskins like the Bavli, and therefore does not bring this halacha that the Rav Shulchan Aruch brings, that some say that you would be obligated to put yourself at some level of risk. And the Safek Nefashos Lahakel, the Chain Pirish HaMishnah Berurah Simin Shin Chavtes Sifkat Yotes, Lam Tzarich Lishkol HaInyan Heitev, Im Yesh Bo Safek Sakana V'lo Ledakdek Bioter. But a person has to be very careful and circumspect in weighing what the risks are, and not to be so super conservative and super cautious, because every situation where you're saving a life could potentially involve risk, right? Anytime I have to help someone get across the street, I see a little child in the middle of the street and they're in danger. So, who knows? There could be some risk if I run and grab the child. Who knows? The car may clip me also, God forbid. But, you have to do whatever you can, and don't be so conservative. And obviously, in situations which are, sometimes these things pass in the blink of an eye, and you have to know how to react really, really quickly. What is he quoting from the Mishnah Berurah in Siman Shin Chavtes? Let's go to the tape. We go to the Mishnah Berurah. Just give me 1 second. Oops. Shulchan Aruch, Arachayim, Shin Chavtes, that's 329. And he was quoting the Mishnah Berurah, Sifkat and Yud Tes. Let's see here. Okay. The Shulchan Aruch says, Aroa Sfina, let me just share the screen with those who are online. Haroa Sfina sheyesh ba Yisrael, amiturefis b'yam, one who sees a boat with Jews that is endangered at sea, v'chein nahar shotev, or in a flowing river, or v'chein yachid hanirdaf mitnei akum, or if one sees an individual being chased by heathens, mitzvah kol adam lechalel aleihem Shabbos kedei lahatzilam. It is a mitzvah to violate Shabbos in order to save them. So that's the context of this halacha. So the Mishnah Berurah writes over here on the right side, Sifkat and Yotes, umikol makom, im yesh sakana lahamatzil ena mechuyav dechayev koidem lechaye chavera. If, however, there is danger involved in saving them, you're not obligated to risk your life in order to save them. And even if there's only a possibility of risk, it's not certain risk, it's suffix risk. You still don't have an obligation because your security, it takes priority over the certain risk of your friend's life. Ulam tzarich lishkol hadvarim heitev im yesh bo suffix sakana, velo ledakdek bioter. But you have to weigh things very well to see if there really is an actual possibility of risk and not to be overly cautious. As the rabbi said, that because a person was overly cautious, this is what brought him to that state. And I don't know what it's referring to over there, but the bottom line is that the Mishnah Berurah seems to echo the same idea. Okay. All right. Okay.
I presume, Rabbi, there's a middle ground where you can call someone to help and not put yourself in danger, albeit breaking Shabbos, so that the person can get helped.
Of course. But remember that whenever you assess that a Jew's life is in danger, you have a mitzvah to violate Shabbos on your own. In other words, you should not let a non-Jew save that person's life if you can save that person's life first. You actually have a commandment. You fulfill a mitzvah by saving their life. Why would you abdicate that mitzvah?
I understand. I'm just thinking, God forbid, if there's a fire, you call 911 because you're not going to go in. You're not a firefighter and able to help, but you can get help for the person.
It depends. It depends how urgent the situation is.
I hear.
Those extra few seconds could mean life and death.
And how dangerous it is for you.
Yeah, right.
All those components.
So, yesh omrim shetzarich. Some say that you need to endanger yourself, and some say that you don't. Okay, so we saw this already. Okay, we just finished this. All right, so let's now take a look. Let's go back to the previous page, and let's take a look at the likutim. Okay, so Tovea Bayam Chola Misukan. If a person's, this is the previous page now, if a person's drowning in the ocean in the Likutim Yud Beis, Hazakuk lahotzaot merubot lahatzalat chayav, kegon la'avor nituach v'chulei. If a person is in need of a huge expenditure in order to help save their life, let's say they need surgery, Ein hayachid bifnei atzmo mechuyav lahotzi kol mamono lahatzilo. So there's no obligation on any one individual in the community to spend all his money in order to save this person's life. B'tzuras hamitzvah b'inyan zeh shehabeis dino ha'omdim b'rosh hatzibur ya'asu et harabim. And so the way that this mitzvah is performed in that kind of scenario where there's a huge amount of money required is that at the discretion of the Beis Din or the community leaders, they make an assessment or tell the community to pay for this expenditure, jointly. Ve'ein zedome laharoet chaver shetovea banahar olistim boim olav. He says that scenario where a person needs a very expensive surgery is not similar to where you see someone drowning or about to be attacked. He says, because in that situation, the yesh omrim dechayv lahotzi kol mamono al zeh, the shiny hasam shelo nimtza matzilim elohu. He says the difference is that where I'm the only person who's available to save that person's life, that's when I have an obligation to spend as much money as it costs, according to the poskim, according to some poskim, right? Because I'm the only one available, that's the reason why I may have to expend all my assets. But if there are other members of the community who can equally share in the burden of saving a life, then we have to do it jointly. We can't just, we can't do it, we can't leave it up to just one person. It's interesting. I just had a thought. A guy comes from Eretz Yisrael to have a very expensive surgery in the United States, let's say. He goes to Columbia Presbyterian, that's where they need the specialist is there. So which community has an obligation to pay for that? Is that the community in New York, or is it the community in that fellow's community in Israel? It really, when you think about it, it's the community where he comes from that has, you have to take care of the poor of your own city. So, I mean, it is problematic because you could also argue that, well, maybe the members of that fellow's community are not as wealthy as some of the community members in New York City. But then, then the question becomes, okay, so how do you balance that? And I don't have an answer. I'm just putting it out there. That's right. And that's the difference, is that when there's someone who whose life needs to be saved, but it's not just me in the picture who can save him, but anyone can save him. So you cannot say that the burden falls on any one individual to spend a lot of money to save that person. What we've been talking about up until now is that I'm walking alone and I see a guy drowning, and I'm the only person available. So therefore I have to do whatever it takes to save him, even if it means, I have to jump into the water and with my Rolex and whatever, or lose money because I was supposed to be somewhere and now I'm going to lose a huge amount of money because I'm busy saving this guy's life or whatever it is. But yeah, okay. Terumat dam, giving blood. Miyuchad shekaruch bahotzaat kol hadam migufo b'meshach shaot. ומוציאים ממנו את הכדוריות ונותנים לחולה שיש בו סכנה, אם מחויב בזה. So, blood donation. A guy needs a transfusion. I'm not sure what the language. מיוחד שכרוך בהוצאת כל הדם מגופו במשך שעות, ומוציא ממנו את הכדוריות, I guess that means the platelets, and you give it to a sick person. And so basically, what he's describing is a transfusion where you take out a large portion of the blood from the donor, but you put it back in after taking out the platelets. That's what he seems to be saying. Right. So he says that there is actually a tshuva about this. We'll take a look at the Shevet HaLevi next week.
What about the person donor? He needs to get back something?
Yes, if you take a lot of it, you might have to get back. Usually there are healthy donors that can replace stuff. Sounds like you have to return it back.
Yeah, it sounds like you want to take out all the blood, is the way he's describing it. He says over the course of several hours, you're taking out all of this guy's blood and spinning it back in as once you filtered out the platelets. This is in the 80s, I think. 80s, yeah. So I guess you're saying they don't do that anymore. Yeah. Okay. All right. So this will be another thing that we'll take a look at in Mitzvah Shem next week, and we'll hold it here. Okay. Have a good Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Thomas.